there. All right. So hello, everybody, and good afternoon. Welcome to our last conversation of the day with our LGBT convening with the Center for Nonprofit Management. My name is Phil Cabucci, and I am so glad to have some wonderful, wonderful members of our community with us today to focus on the conversation of power and privilege and how that impacts the Pride movement. I just knocked my screen out of my face, so sorry. And so what I'd like to do is start with a quick round of introductions. And my four panelists today are Olivia Hill, Terrence Bond, Councilmember Emily Benedict, and Matthew Gann. And so we'll start in that order. And Olivia, if you could give a brief introduction, and then we'll go to Terrence, Emily, and then Matthew.
Hi, my name is Olivia Hill, and I'm retired. I'm a community activist and community leader in Nashville.
Hi, everybody. My name is Terrence Bond. I am a senior counsel with HCA in their revenue cycle division Parallon. And I do have to be an annoying attorney for a second and just say that I'm only appearing in my individual capacity, not as a representative of my employer or any public or private organization with whom I might hold an affiliation. Sorry about that.
I'm Emily Benedict, and I need to give the same disclaimer that nothing that I'm going to be talking about today has anything to do with Metro Nashville. I am a realtor in my day job, and in my part-time night job and day job, I'm a Metro's councilwoman here in Nashville and serve the 7th District, which is Inglewood and parts of Madison.
I think that's me, right? Okay. I'm Matthew Gann. I have to sort of similar thing to read. Opinions are of my own and not representative of any organization in which I'm involved. I serve as the Associate Vice Chancellor of Marketing, Digital Strategy, and Public Relations for the Tennessee Board of Regents. It's the state's community and technical college system here in Tennessee. I'm also the past president of Nashville Pride and a founding board member of Inclusive Tennessee. Glad to be here. And I did not know I was able to join until about 7 minutes ago. So glad to be here, and I'm unprepared, but I'm happy to be here.
All right, well, thank you all so very much. What I'm going to start off by talking about today is this idea around pride, primarily, right? That the celebration of pride, we are, obviously moving into this Pride season. June is Pride Month. And it's a time where we, as the LGBTQIA plus community, celebrate who we are and what we've come from and the history of our movement. We face daily reminders as existence of LGBTQIA plus people of the ongoing and persistent injustices that continue to impact our community. And continue in our society. And some of our conversations earlier today certainly covered those topics. I think what's interesting is that with the COVID-19 pandemic, there's even more disparities that have been brought to light in the last 2 years. It's been a long 2 years, y'all, let me tell you, about where there's even further disparities. We awaken to stories of continued racist abuse throughout our community, murders of trans people of color, and Black men being murdered at the hands of law enforcement, and other things that really are dramatic issues. I'm going to say sorry in advance for my dog, who has decided to join the conversation today. So you may be hearing some dog. I'll try to mute myself as often as I can. So these are stories of ongoing crisis, right? And these injustices are things that we face as a society, but it's all because of white supremacy. It starts with white supremacy, right? And this country was founded on a notion of white supremacy. And over hundreds of years, systems and foundations and institutions have been developed to maintain that. And what we as a community of LGBTQIA plus people, we are dealing with multiple levels of marginalization in some ways. And so what I want to talk about today is this idea of how pride plays an important role in all of our identities. And so similar to how I started off our conversation at 9:30 this morning, I want to ask each of my panelists this afternoon, what does pride mean to you? Sort of noting my initial introduction. And I'll start with Matthew, because you've been past president of Pride.
You know, what pride means to me really is not, it's beyond, you know, a festival, a month, or anything else. But growing up in rural Tennessee, population, I think, you know, 200 people, the first interaction that I had with other gay people, other people of color, was in college, right? So I felt unsafe, quite frankly, in growing up. And so pride means to me really safety, a safety in a community, safety in knowing people have my back. There are people like me around. And I think, you know, the month of June, in all of its capacities, tells our kids, youth that grew up in, are growing up in spaces that they feel unsafe in, or they feel less than. This month really tells people, those kids, that you are worth it. You have people out there. There is community, and there is safety, and there is power. And not to, you know, get on this too much, but really it does get better. And that pride is such an important piece of why I'm still around today, quite frankly. So it means a lot to me.
That's a powerful thought. It's also a reason why so many of our young people are around today. Young people that have grown up, right? Pride is that one piece that truly gives us a sense of belonging, and a sense of feeling like we are part of something. Olivia, I'm going to call on you next. But the reason I'm going to also mention this is that I love what you posted something yesterday. You had friends who had sent you some pride flowers. And I thought that was such a meaningful message, right? It was a really sweet way of someone to show that the colors of the rainbow mean something to you, right? That it's a way of connecting. It's a way of identifying. And so I'll ask you, what does pride mean to you?
Pride means everything to me. Many of you all know my story. I'm a new trans woman. I just transitioned 4 years ago, so I'm brand new. I marched in my first parade, 2019, and I cried the entire way. I felt like everybody was there cheering me on, is what it felt like. And to live my authentic self, it's just, there's really nothing that can compare to that. And Phil's heard me say this a bunch of times. I could hit the lottery and it wouldn't make me any happier. It would probably change my location, and it would be somewhere salty, sandy, and sunny, but it wouldn't make me any happier, because to be in your own skin and be okay with yourself, and to be surrounded by your chosen family and the people that really get you. I mean, I've got no real words that can say anything more than just authenticity in self and pride of all the people that you build around you.
I love your story. Thank you, Olivia. Terrence.
Pride to me, it means several things. I think and it relates, both to what we've heard from Olivia and Matthew. And to me, it's feeling safe, encouraged, inspired, empowered, compelled to sort of fully occupy your skin, to show up as yourself, wherever you might be. I think in my history, pride was sort of a very long road for me to reach, for me to use that word to describe how I felt about myself as a gay, Black, many other categorical person and all those things co-occurring in my life. It took a minute because I sort of grew up like, my life is very much defined by geography. I was never, as a young person who left Jackson, Tennessee when I was 17, I never occupied that space as a person who was both Black and gay at the same time, or any other category to which I belonged that I would later embrace. I was then a Black person who was hiding the fact that he was gay and hadn't said it out loud really to anybody in a way in which I was comfortable hiding that. And then when I left Jackson, I became a gay person who felt like he had to leave the Black part of himself behind to assimilate with my mostly white counterpart. So, and then of course the other manifestations of who I am started to fall into place as I got older and older. And now at 43, I can finally say I feel like a fully integrated individual who embraces all aspects of himself and is not afraid to show up as all those versions of myself in whatever place I happen to inhabit. So that's pride in a nutshell for me.
I didn't know that you moved from Jackson. That's interesting.
I did. I ran screaming at 17. I was ready to see what else was out there. And I knew that I was sort of suffocating in a place where I did not feel like there was any sense of community really for me to join.
Yeah. Yeah. Councilmember Bender.
Phil, I'm. You can call me Emily. Everybody on this call can please call me Emily. And I was guessing I was going to go next. I am a public official, so I'm not always the smartest.
Well, I was going to say that I wanted to before you spoke, I did want to call out and thank you, you and your colleagues for sponsoring the Pride Month proclamation last night at the Metro Council meeting. Those are little things that mean a lot to our community, to have to be recognized, to be identified in such a public manner. And so thank you.
Thank you. It's actually being signed by the mayor in about 15 minutes. So it'll be done at that point.
All right.
So, and I think I'm somebody who just jots down words, jots down things that come to mind. And so as everybody's been talking so far, some of the words have been there, but Phil, I'd like to touch on what you just said, which to me is being an example to others. And last night when the resolution was up, the chair of the LGBTQ caucus spoke, Council Member Nancy Van Rees. She spoke about her relationship and that the first Pride Festival was right after she met her partner, who is still her partner after 34 years of marriage. And it was at Centennial Park in 1988. There's a few things that come to mind here: legacy, celebration, community, which we've heard a lot about here, connectedness, education, diversity, love, safe, and welcome. So those are the things that when I think of pride, I think in my role, it really is about being an example and letting people know that they can be safe, that they can be out, that they can accomplish great things. If they have questions or want to run for office or want to get civically engaged, there's a lot of opportunity. And we just need to, I think Pride is a great way to help people see the diversity in the things that we can do within the LGBTQ community to make big contributions to this world. And that might be that we are just out in our family. That is a big contribution in a lot of ways, especially in a town like Jackson. Right. And where my father-in-law lives in Jackson. And so Jessica, my wife, and I know what it's like in Jackson, and it's not the same as in big cities. And we have people all over this state, all over this region who come into Pride and feel welcome, maybe for the only time in the entire calendar year.
That's a good point. And I think, what you touched on, Emily, is this idea, it's more than just a celebration in the park. It's more than just a party in the park. It is community, right? It's an opportunity for community to come together. And I think this year, after the 2 years that we've experienced, this year's Pride celebration is probably more important than ever in a lot of ways. And when we're thinking about the past, present, and the future of Pride and the LGBTQ plus movement, we can talk about the past a lot. We need to learn from the past, right? But I want to be talking about our future, right? And that's really where I want to spend our time today. I want us to talk about where we as community leaders, we as community partners and organizations, where can we be creating the biggest changes? Where do we see the need in our communities to help the largest numbers of people, number one, and how can we address process that is putting LGBT people ahead in the advocacy space, right?
I'd be glad to kick that one off, Phil, because I think this is a big pitch that I've got is don't get mad, get elected, as they say at the Victory Institute.
Yep.
So, one of the reasons why I ran actually was because we had the opportunity to have a rainbow wave of candidates. So down from one district north and then back south, and we had a big hole where my district is. So part of the reason why I ran was because I wanted to run as an out LGBTQ candidate. And again, being that example to people of what you can do, what we can accomplish. 33%, there was a 33% increase in LGBTQ candidates in the November ballot between 2018 and the midterm in 2020 general election. There's 1,006 out LGBTQ candidates in the country. That is less than 0.5% of the number of elected candidates in this country. That alone, to me, is a big opportunity that we have to be out there and to empower folks and help them know this is a phenomenal, large way that we can make an impact together. And there's a team of people behind us who are helping us do that. It's not something I do alone. It's something there's a team of folks doing, but I think that's a big way to reach a lot of people. It's get elected, get involved, join a board or a commission in the community, and join a Pride board. That's a great way to start too. I started in a similar role with Pride 20 years ago, let's just say.
It's a lot of how Pride has changed in 20 years, right? Olivia, I want to talk to you a little bit about the trans community and how you've become an activist and advocate for so much of the trans community here in Middle Tennessee, and what your some of what your passion projects are, what you're working on, and where some of the greatest needs still lie. Understanding that we live in a state that continually tries to attack trans youth and trans individuals across the board. What are some of the things that you are working on that you can, or that you're seeing boots on the ground that we can help foster and change?
The biggest thing that that I try to work on is I've noticed in the trans community is most trans folks either kind of go left or right. And the people that go left are the people that have finished their journey. They've become somewhat or completely passable, and they're just tired and hate the struggle. And so they just blend in with whatever they've transitioned to, and they don't tell anybody they're trans. There's no representation. They're just tired of the fight, because all that we have to go through to get to what we kind of consider the end of a transition is a lot. And then you've got the other people that are just so scared to be out that they isolate yourself with only other trans folks. And so that's why I try to be out so much and tell everybody that I'm trans. I go to places where I get my nails done and I tell people, you ever met a trans person? And 99% of the time, I'm always the first person they've ever met in person. And they always check, make sure I don't have horns, and they look behind me, that I don't have a tail. And then they realize that I'm just a normal human. And that, you know, I just try to be as big a representative as I can for trans folks. And this Pride Parade, I know there's going to be a bunch of kids standing on the sideline. And when they see people standing out front, I hope that it gives them an opportunity to say, maybe I can do this too. Because there's so very little trans representation.
I think we representation obviously matters, right? And it's more important than ever as we continue to see the movement and see our community evolve. And our earlier conversations have certainly touched on that, and in very enlightening ways. I referred to this in our earlier session, but one of our first panelists of the day, Amy, said at the very beginning that the rainbow umbrella sometimes doesn't cover all of us. And it was such a powerful thing to hear and say, and it's true. What I'd love to sort of move into next is this is a conversation around the racial disparities that we experience within our community. There's specific data that some of us in this audience may not even realize, is that Black men who sleep with men, Black MSM, typically or have a 1 to 2 transmission rate. Is that correct, Terrence? Is that it's something in that range?
Yes, yeah, it's substantially higher versus the rest of the population
who contract HIV, whereas white men, it's 1 to 10, 1 to 11. And so there's a really important conversation that needs to be had around this multi-level, the multiple levels of identity that people live through as a gay Black man or as a gay Black woman. And so, Terrence, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your experience, probably more as a youth, and then the transition of coming into Nashville and coming into a city that was hopefully a little bit more accepting, but still a path that was probably very hard.
Yeah, there have been difficulties all along the way. Certainly as a youth, not only did I not see, Black gay people thriving, I just didn't see a lot of gay people thriving. I saw really gay people were kind of presented to me as either a complete anathema, or, and people talking to me about it, whether they sensed that I was, or whether they were just trying to do something to protect me from falling into that, since they thought it was a choice pretty uniformly. So it was always presented to me as like, well, there's a reason you don't see this, this is not a category which you want to inhabit. And so that sort of layered on to the fact that as a Black person, I just felt different and sort of uncomfortable in my skin anyway, and that there were places that I didn't belong, and that there are things that I couldn't do, or there are things that were out of reach for me. And that feeling sort of permeated all of my experiences, both as a Black person and a gay person. And I remember the first time I went to there used to be a gay bar in Jackson called The Other Side. And it was right on the outskirts of town. If you've ever been to Madison County, it's on your way toward Milan as you're leaving. And it's actually it's set off from the road in a really poorly lit kind of area. And there's a big sign at the front, but if you're not familiar with the town, you wouldn't be clear on what it was. And you go, and it's kind of a secluded area where you park. And I remember walking in for the first time, handshaking, sort of unsure as to what I was going to encounter when I walked in, and just sort of walked into a room full of people, 99% white, who didn't really acknowledge me, didn't really make any effort to sort of, I guess, inquire as to why I was there. I think I was expecting a welcome or some sort of an invitation to join this community of people that I finally have the courage to go out and publicly explore, where others might be found. And so not long after that, I left Jackson to go to college at MTSU in Murfreesboro, and then from there on to law school at UT. And that same discomfort followed me everywhere I went. It was almost as if I had to redeclare myself everywhere I went to new communities of people. And as I began to become more comfortable with the idea of dating, I can't tell you how many times I would frequently, because there are no racially specific desires in my mind as to who I might date. So I kind of just picked people based on who I thought I'd be interested in. And I can't tell you how many times I got from people of all races, "Oh, I don't do the Black thing," and it was referred to as the Black thing, as if there was some sort of an interest, or as you would categorize it, as a fetish or some sort of special interest category that people would subscribe to or not subscribe to at their option. And so that was a battle for a bit. Coming to Nashville, which happened right around the time that I was 30, that continued to be the case. Nashville can be a very stratified city. Categories tend to matter here a lot. Whether you're categorized as a bear, a twink, any of the other myriad categories that exist under this LGBTQIA plus umbrella, you sort of get assigned a label and you're sort of expected to stay with that group. So sort of learning how to make friends and learning how to create associations with people that were meaningful was a bit difficult and limiting because of what I looked like, both in terms of my skin tone, my musculature, my physical appearance, otherwise, just lots of barriers to sort of clear. And I would say I moved here in 2007. 15 years later, there's been some change, but there's still sort of barriers to be pushed down. And I think there's discourse to be stirred about why it is that we stratify so much in a community that we fought so hard to just have the courage to enter and say, "Hey, this is where I feel like I belong."
I think there's a huge conversation around belonging that is desperately needed in this, in not only Nashville, but in the entire LGBT community.
Right.
Because, so often this movement for LGBTQ rights has been whitewashed. It has been felt like a white gay male centric event, where whoever's the prettiest, most muscular can be the one that's featured, right?
Right.
But the reality is that our movement, the Stonewall, which is considered the birth of the LGBT movement, was started by Black women, Black trans women, I should say, Black queer people who were at the front lines for those 6 nights in the summer of 1969, right? And those are the people who are the ones that started this this revolution in many ways, to allow for our freedom and to be even able to have some of these conversations today. So what I want to talk about next is sort of this intersection of race and then the additional barriers like access to healthcare, medication, proximity to higher infection rates, but then how that also plays a role across our entire community, right? So Matthew, I'm going to have you jump in here in terms of specifically the intersection of the need for more LGBTQ healthcare and how that affects has an impact in privilege. LGBTQ just access to certain resources, access to a bathroom for a trans person, and privilege. Can you talk a little bit about that?
You know, I am not a healthcare expert, but I will talk a little bit about this.
Get one.
Something would probably call Chris Ott for this down here. But I can speak on the point of what I see and
Yeah.
then the educational pieces of it. It every day, you know, I hate Facebook, but it's part of my job. Every day I see people asking, especially young trans people, where's a trusted healthcare provider? And there's conversation and there's people that you know, they try to help, but it is difficult for the trans population to find affirming healthcare. Same thing with young gay people. We see it in our college campuses. The biggest question we have is where can I go that has affirming healthcare? When you walk in and say, you know, I need an STD test, without being judged, and like, especially in these rural places, right? People have to understand where you're coming from a little bit before the person that's coming to you feels comfortable in that environment. So I do think education of healthcare providers is something that we need to do, and we need to have those conversations as adults to make sure that there is affirming healthcare options for our youth. The bathroom bills, Lord, I'm very glad that well, as an education provider, our system, we did not post signs on bathrooms. Our general counsel luckily said, you know, this doesn't even qualify for us, and luckily that got stricken down for businesses as well, flatly because people go to the bathroom to use the bathroom, and I really will never understand, you know, and I apologize to generalize this, but why old white men think that people go into the bathroom to do anything else, quite frankly, than to use the bathroom. Maybe it's their own perverse ideas on what happens in a bathroom. But, you know, access to use the restroom to me is basic healthcare. If a young trans person has to hold all day because the school that they go to doesn't allow them to use the bathroom that affirms in their gender identity, or they feel unsafe going in there because the school does not support them and allows things to happen in the bathroom such as bullying. That is basic healthcare. And I think we, again, as adults, as people that are active in our community, can play a big role in educating people and standing up for these things. Every time I see something on social media, every conversation that I have, when somebody brings up something about bathrooms or healthcare, I jump in. I will say several years ago, I was afraid to do that, especially, you know, as a state government employee where, you know, our legislators fight every day that they're in session for my right to exist to be taken away. But I stand up and I say, this is not right. This is not going to, you know, move forward in our goals, you know, as a society. Again, you know, I work with 40 colleges. Every one of our colleges has affirming spaces, affirming faculty, affirming staff. We understand that it's a need. In order for our state to go forward, we have to include the populations that will make us successful. Black men going in education is an issue right now. So we're doing some amazing things to make sure Black men understand the opportunities that we have in our colleges, and making sure that they have wraparound services. The beautiful part, at MTSU, they have the big LGBT conference, and all of our colleges, including the state's universities, are really realizing that it wraparound services to make people feel comfortable, to make sure they know they have access to healthcare on campus, to make sure they have access to these resources is very important. Again, one population I think that we are missing, and that is one, the Black male community, Phil, and two, youth. There is, you know, we see sometimes, and we've dealt with this directly, Phil, there are kids that are, you know, 9, 10, 11 years old, gay, that are not welcome in their schools. We have to provide a space for them somehow, and we have to start working with those kids to make sure they have access to the resources they need to be successful and to just live.
Wow. I think that there's Yeah, there's a quote from Larry Kramer that, and if you don't know who Larry Kramer is, I might just say Google it, but he's a leader. He was a passionate leader of the gay movement in the 70s, and really through over the last he just passed away 2 years ago, I believe. And he was a founder of ACT UP, and has done a lot of work fighting for HIV and AIDS research and drugs and medicine and care for gay men. And one of the quotes that he's written some really fantastic books. They're also books that are will rile you up because they're a little on the nose, but I think that's his point, right? And they're causing you to gain into action. I really want to take this new toy away, but I'm just going to let it be. Anyway, the quote from Larry Kramer is that our whole lives have been a journey, right? And that we are going to continue to be on a journey as long as we are, and we will never get there. But the one thing that we can continue to do along the way is support one another and continue to try to emulate change, emulate love, emulate kindness every step of the way. And I think that that's sort of the key thing to take away from that message. You know, as a queer individual, I think that we all we all have the responsibility to understand how sacrifice works, right? And that there are so many people in our communities who still to this day are treated inhumanely. And because of their treatment, it has also given some of us the ability to sit here today and have these conversations, right? And it wouldn't be without their efforts that I could sit here and use my voice. Any of my panelists could sit here and use their voices. You know, society 20 years ago said that being gay was wrong. And, you know, I grew up in a home where I was told that I was disgusting, right? And so there is a dramatic difference that has changed in our world over the last 20 years, and how we are now able to use our voices to create the change that is so desperately needed. And so one of the things that I want to kind of shift over to as we're talking about privilege, and it's how can we use our privilege to create change? What is the biggest thing that is sitting in your mind, panelists, in the next coming years that we can be doing? What can our organizations be doing? What can our people be doing to create the change that's desperately needed for full acceptance of our community?
Ooh, that's
that one.
You're welcome.
That's a layered answer right there.
We've got 20 minutes.
Well, I'll give it an initial stab. I think one of the most important things we have to do is we have to recognize, as people, all of whom have certain measures of privilege, depending on who else is in the room. I think we have to really recognize and interrogate how we show up in the world. I've heard it said before that you can only meet someone as deeply as you met yourself, and I believe that very much to be true. I think we all have a lot of work to do individually to find out how we're put together. You know, obviously we know the journey that we've walked to accept ourselves as LGBTQIA plus people, but we don't always know all the other things that have gone into creating who we are, and all these environmental factors that have impacted how we assess the world that we live in and how we interact with other people, and all those ways that are obvious and those that should be obvious, and maybe those that are totally latent, in which we exercise bias, in which we suffuse bias into our environment that makes other people feel unwelcome and unsafe. So I think that one of the most important things we can do is to continue to have those conversations with ourselves, continue to seek out feedback, not just presume to know what the needs of the other are and assert ourselves in ways that are damaging, but that we think are heroic, and not to assign ourselves heroes because we recognize and want to do something about it, because we can oftentimes get ahead of ourselves in the effort to try and make up for something, and to try to make up for a problem that we may not even fully understand. So, you know, I think that some really deep and intensive self-work, as well as a willingness to just kind of shut the hell up and listen and observe, and be quick to act in the right ways, is one layer of what's needed.
As a person with a therapist as a partner, I was writing down what Kyle would say, and you have to acknowledge that there's a problem before you can start working on the problem. It's like Nashville Pride back in the day, Phil. We started at the same time. You had to realize there was a race issue. Everybody could say, no, there's not a race issue. We have people, we're coming in, we don't have that. No, there's a race issue. And as Terrence said, then we had to shut the hell up and back up and listen, and it doesn't fix itself very quickly. There's still issues. There's issues with the trans community and the Black community feeling safe at a festival. And imagine if they feel unsafe at a festival surrounded by their community, what they feel like everyday life. So I think you just have to acknowledge that there is an issue before our community, and acknowledge the issue and listen, and then we can start working on the issue.
That also means that there's no opinions on other people's queerness. Go ahead, Emily.
I was going to say that Matthew hit that right on the head, that last part. So, you know, I think that we need to keep talking about this. We need to listen about this. And one of the most important things that I do as an elected is listen. People want to be heard. And it's only by hearing people that I understand how I might be able to impact them through my role. And that there is a lot to learn for somebody like me. Gen X, grew up in a small town, nobody Black in my school, not one single Black person in my school, country town. And, you know, that's what my experience is. We all have different life stories, right? And so it's up to me to listen to what your life story is. And I don't care if you're straight and Black. I don't care if you're trans and Latinx. To me, if I don't have the same life experience as you, I need to ask the question, what's your life experience? And then I need to shut up and I need to listen. And I think that as a white person, that's probably the most important thing that I do in today and this week and this month and this year, is making sure that I'm showing up and listening, because for far too long, people who look like me have been doing far too much talking. So with that, I'll stop talking now too. So I do like to joke around sometimes and make light of it. I don't mean to make light of any topic, but I do like to do that. But I don't want that to take away from any seriousness around this topic. This is so important. And, you know, listening is how I learned how to do what I do today. It was knocking on doors and meeting people at their place, meeting people in their space, that I was able to learn their experience and try to position solutions to make their lives better.
The key to success is listening and learning. I have found in my life that the best course of action is to read and learn as much as possible. I said this before in the last session. And then that way you can show up for groups that may not necessarily be like you, so that you can support those groups and learn and volunteer and be of service, so that you can create that sense of trust that is so desperately needed when you're trying to create stronger community. Because at the end of the day, if I'm coming in as a, if we're using a race example, if I'm coming in as a white face trying to create addressing a race issue and trying to create all the change, deciding as a leader of a group without the input of somebody who has that lived experience, that's very dangerous. And the only way that we can address the changes that we need to address are by bringing people in and having conversation that is meaningful and with our barriers and guards down, so that we can have honest and open communication. Olivia, I want to let you get a second to add into this conversation as well before we wrap up here in the last few minutes.
I'll try to be brief, but privilege is probably one of the biggest things I speak of, because it's the thing of my transition that rung my bell the most. Many of you know I'm recently retired from Vanderbilt Power Plant. I was there 26 years. I was in the Navy for 10 years. And I've held every single position at Vanderbilt Power Plant, from jet engine mechanic to steam turbine specialist, diesel mechanic, welder, plumber, pipe fitter. I designed the entire control system that's running Vanderbilt Power Plant right now. And I was under the impression that I excelled in all of these areas because I was the first one that got in every morning, an hour before everybody else. And I stayed later than everybody else left. And a lot of the guys left at 5, and I would stay till 8, 9, 10 o'clock so that I could learn better. And when a welder showed up, I say, hey, can you kind of teach me that? And he'd be like, yeah, grab it and do this. And so I was under the impression that I excelled so well because of me. And it wasn't. It's because I was a white, cisgender, straight man. And as soon as that part of me went away, I no longer had any value. And so I spend a good portion of my time talking to people about the loss of male privilege that I had absolutely no idea that I had. And it rung my bell. The other thing is I used to present straight because I've always dated women. Now I'm a lesbian. So now I'm trans, I'm a lesbian. And so I'm further kind of down the ladder. And I just ask everybody, the thing that really has done things for me is I'm a combat veteran from Desert Storm, and I used to have an issue with people of Muslim faith. I was on a board about 3 years ago that was a very sweet, amazing Muslim lady was on there with me. And after I spent some time with her, I realized that she just was a normal, awesome, amazing human. And it was me that judged her. And so I ask each and every one of you to take a second and look at all your friends and bring somebody in that's Muslim, bring somebody in that's Republican, bring somebody in that's straight, bring somebody in that's male or black, white, purple, green, so that we as LGBT folks kind of expect everybody to accept us. And we ought to do the same thing to every single other person, whether we like them or not. I'll shut up.
I actually don't want you to. Thank you all so much for sharing. I really appreciate the way that this conversation has gone today. It's enlightening. I appreciate the thought and the way that you all have shared your input and your thoughts around privilege and pride and how that plays a role. The one thing I want to touch on the very end of this conversation is around the idea of justice. And so there's been a lot of talk around, DEIB, DEI work, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. But one thing that we often fail to talk about is justice. And so when we're thinking about justice from a perspective of our communities, what is one thing from a justice-centered lens that we can be focused on as we're moving forward as a community? And I will let whoever wants to take the lead on that one take the lead.
Not sure how we actualize it, but centerpiece of justice for me is restoration. Restoring what's lost. In criminal law, there is oftentimes, you're required to make restitution. Usually it's in the form of, giving back financially what you have unlawfully taken from someone. As I said, I don't know how that looks in the real world, but I think restoration is really necessary to both acknowledge what's been done previously that created the unlevel playing field, and then also to ensure that structurally the changes are occurring so that that doesn't happen again and people aren't robbed of what was rightfully theirs going forward once we are restored people.
Phil, when I think about justice, I think about I think Terrence said a lot of great stuff right there. I think about, I look at it from my council perspective. Now I have my personal perspective, but that's what shapes me on council. And, I can change the law. I have the opportunity to make things more just for Nashvillians. And so that is a part of a lot of decisions that I make. Now, a lot of what we're doing is zoning and, really boring stuff. But even within that, there's ways to make sure that the community and the members of the community is members, right? It is people, making sure that everybody is treated equally, fairly, and that we are focused on making sure that we're protecting people and protecting their rights. And this goes from everything from displacement to hate crimes. I mean, all the way around, we have to make sure that this world is a just world for everybody, that I'm standing up in front of a crowd and saying, this is who we are. I'm wearing my pin for Pride Month. I support everybody out there, and I want to make sure that whatever it is that you want to do, that you can freely do that, and that you are protected if that's what you want to do. Now, I think that also historically we need to look at that. But I think in today's world, how to deliver justice to me is creating law that creates just that gives the opportunity for people to receive justice, whether that's driving down the road in your car or food deserts or hate crimes. Again, there's a lot of ways that justice looks like, right? So and the LGBTQ community is everywhere. So when I talk about displacements of a poor community, perhaps to another part of town, like what we see at River Chase, the LGBTQ community is a part of the community at River Chase. What are we doing to make sure that everybody at River Chase is receiving justice, is receiving resources to help them start their lives anew, and some other residents? That includes the LGBTQ community. So from that perspective, we're not different, right? And I think it's important that we look at ourselves as not different, that we look at ourselves as a part of the overall larger community. And then within that community, making sure that we are lifting each other up and and welcoming each other. So I got a little off topic, but to me, justice means all of those things. So thank you. And I would say, Phil, I know we're low on time. I can't thank you enough for having this. This is fantastic. Very glad to be a part.
I know
Thank
we
you.
have like 3 minutes. I'll echo what Emily just said, Phil. But is thinking with what Terrence said and what Emily said is, equity. Equity and justice can be synonymous, but it's a misunderstanding of what equity is and a lot of what we do. It's not giving something to somebody else or giving free things, right? And a lot of people misunderstand that. And equity is making sure we are supportive and making sure certain populations have the resources they need to be equal. Equity and equality different, but to make sure that they can succeed. And I think that's something that we sometimes miss in our own community is that equity piece.
Olivia, do you want to add anything?
No, I think everybody's pretty well said everything that I was gonna say, so all I would say would be echoing the amazing things that Terrence said that I think are very important, and the things that Emily said I think are equally great. And then Matthew kind of echoed some of those and had their own. So I mean, I really don't have a whole lot to add other than justice is equality.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think what's interesting when I'm looking at justice, it's about improving the lives and the rights of LGBTQ plus people throughout the United States and throughout the world. And that's, like Emily, like you said, it's health and human services. It is everything that's related to stability and economics and labor. It's making sure that the law enforcement is just, making sure that we have proper education and access to education. It's housing, homelessness, addressing those properly, immigration and foreign policy. All of those things play a role in the entire lived experience of LGBT people. And it's not just this idea that we are looking for a specific right outside of, it's any different from anybody else at the end of the day. So on that note, thank you all so much for being here. And thank you for joining in conversation. We are wrapping today's time with the LGBT Day of Convening. We will be following up our conversation to engage in future conversations via email. And so be on the lookout for an email from myself on Friday with the recordings, some book recommendations, and then opportunity to engage in further conversation. I am looking forward to getting to know each of you and working with you in the months ahead. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I hope to see you at Pride.
Thank you so much, Phil.
Thanks,
All
Phil.
right.
Thank you, Phil.